Well, another Halloween is here, another spooky season is upon us, which means that it is time once again to sit here and reflect on how Darkstalkers is dead. Yes, every year on this channel we do something dedicated to Darkstalkers, one of my favorite fighting game franchises, but I can't lie, after all these years I'm just getting beaten down. I can't keep this going anymore. Knowing that there's no future for this franchise has torn me up inside. I mean, heck, Street Fighter's director Nakayama even brought up on Twitter that a couple years back, Capcom canceled a brand new Darkstalkers game. Yeah, that was a wonderful announcement to make this Halloween. Dear God, this fan base just keeps losing over and over again. And I can't deal with this disappointment any longer. There's no reason to keep talking about this series. Screw it, I'll take it. Woo! Darkstalkers ain't dead, baby! Yeah, Night Warriors are back! Hello and welcome to Let's Make a Sequel, the show where we tackle a fighting game that desperately needs a new installment, and then we say what we'd like to see in it. And when it comes to Capcom fighting games, obviously the #1 name under their roof is Street Fighter. But after that, if Capcom was to make one more fighting game this generation, it would definitely be Capcom vs. SNK. I mean, Terry and Mai are coming to Street Fighter, Ken and Chun-Li are going to Fatal Fury, the two teams are big fans of each other. Yeah, if we're getting another fighting game, it's definitely going to be that. But if we got 3 fighting games from Capcom this generation, the next one would definitely be Marvel vs. Capcom. I mean, we got that collection, it was a huge deal, Marvel is more willing to let people mess around with their properties now, the stars are just aligning on this one. But if we got a 4th fighting game from Capcom this generation, it would probably be something brand new. I mean, Capcom's trying a lot of new franchises, they got a lot of creative people there who probably want to try something new, but if there was a 5th Capcom fighting game, okay, fine. Listen, something I want to make clear right here at the top, Darkstalkers has a ton of fans. The characters are beloved. Heck, I see more fan art for these characters today than I was seeing 10, 15 years ago. It is amazing to me, the staying power of these characters and how many people out there still love them to this day. So yeah, there are very passionate Darkstalkers fans out there. But make no mistake, we're not stupid. Trust me, we know Capcom is in no rush to make a brand new Darkstalkers game. We got a better chance of someone buying the title away from Capcom and then making their own game than we have of Capcom actually making an official next installment. So when you hear Darkstalkers fan talk about a brand new game, trust me, we're not seriously talking about like it could happen. We're just daydreaming about how much we would love to see this series come back, and you know what? Ain't nothing wrong with that. Ain't nothing wrong with having fun and thinking about how cool it would be to revive the Night Warriors, especially now during the spookiest time of the year. Heck, even Capcom themselves is getting in on it this year. They put out Darkstalkers Pass in Street Fighter 6, where you can unlock a costume, and for once, it's not Morrigan. They're actually giving John Talbane some love for the first time ever. So none of this is serious, none of this is us sitting here saying, oh, this could actually maybe really happen. No, nobody believes that. This is just us enjoying ourselves today and talking about what we would love to see if Darkstalkers ever got another game, even though we know that's not going to happen. There. I had to say that at the top of the episode because anytime that you say you like Darkstalkers, somebody unaware of how 2010's Capcom operated jumps out to say, well, then you should have bought that re-release 10 years ago. Yes, thank you very much for that sage wisdom. You really cracked this case wide open. It truly is our fault that the 5th re-release of a 15-year-old game didn't make back all the money lost on Street Fighter Cross Tekken. What would we ever do without you explaining to us why we're not allowed to enjoy things? Yeah, hey, like I said, we're all just here for fun today. But that is something that I want to address right here. I know a lot of people think, oh, Darkstalkers wouldn't sell well these days. I've heard that from a lot of people, even from other Darkstalkers fans. And I get it. Sure, this used to be Capcom's second best-selling original fighting game series, but that was like 2 decades ago. The world is a very different place now. Even with a passionate fan base, that doesn't mean that that fan base would bring in those huge numbers that Capcom wants. But I honestly think that a new Darkstalkers would sell well. And do you know why? We are currently living through one of the biggest fighting game booms since the 90s. Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and Tekken are all doing massive numbers right now. Guilty Gear Strive has a larger player base than pretty much every other Guilty Gear combined. Third parties are seriously attempting to break into the fighting game space. EVO and other tournaments are seeing astronomical entry numbers. And it's not just fighting games that are doing well, Capcom is doing some of the best business it has seen in generations. They're back at the top of their game. Fans both old and new are flocking to the company. Even games that were just okay successes in the past, like Dragon's Dogma, are bringing in big numbers now. So why do I think a brand new Darkstalkers game would sell well today? Because I think literally any brand new Capcom fighting game could sell well today. Rival Schools, Slam Masters, hell, even a new Star Gladiator would probably do decent numbers as long as it looked good and Capcom advertised it well. And I know that some people worry that if you put out too many fighting games, then it'll oversaturate the market, and that's totally true, but we're not even close to that right now. Heck, with the rising time and cost of development, the big 3 fighting game companies have gone from making multiple fighting games each generation to really only having one. My point is, there is plenty of room in the fighting game pool, and the water has never been finer. Far more titles could jump in right now. But let's actually get to the meat of today's episode. How would we make a new Darkstalkers? Well, the first thing I want to cover is the budget. Street Fighter 6 had a massive budget, and most of that went into creating this big open world single player mode, which did work out for the game. That single player world tour mode was a huge draw when the game first came out. There were so many people, not even fighting game players, just video game fans in general, coming together to check it out. Capcom knew that Street Fighter was one of its major franchises, and they gave it a budget appropriate for that. Darkstalkers, on the other hand, yeah, listen, I love it, but it's not going to bring in Street Fighter numbers. So if Street Fighter 6 was a AAA game, we'd want Darkstalkers to be more like a AA game. However, here's the thing. You can still make really good AA fighting games. ArcSys Works makes some of the best fighting games out there, and most of them aren't even close to the budget of Capcom's games. You could totally put out there a fantastic looking Darkstalkers game for far less than the cost of Street Fighter 6. In fact, speaking of ArcSys Works, ArcSys is a workhorse studio. You call them up to make your game, they're going to at least hear you out. And if we ever got a brand new Darkstalkers, I know Capcom would want to make it in-house so that way they could use their RE engine, and hey, that engine does look great. But I'd almost rather they hand it off to ArcSys Works, and that's because of my next point. What would the art style of this game be? As amazing as Street Fighter 6 looks, I'm going to say that Darkstalkers should look totally different. Partly because you don't want your 2 fighting games to look exactly like each other, you want them to stand out and feel unique. And I trust ArcSys Works to pull that off, not just because of their cel-shading style that would be perfect for Darkstalkers, but also because as good as that RE engine looks, one thing they haven't shown off just yet is their ability to be... how can I put this? Silly, goofy, zany, cartoonish. And that's one of the most important elements of Darkstalkers. Yes, it's macabre. Yes, it's horrific and dark. When it wants to be. The other half of the time, it is a wacky slapstick comedy. You look closely frame by frame at these animations, and you will see characters twisting and squashing and stretching like they're a Looney Tunes character. In fact, the original animators of the game literally studied Tom and Jerry cartoons to figure out what the tone of the game should be. These characters get their hair and faces burned when they get hit by fire attacks. They get flattened into pancakes when they're squashed. They bump big booties around. They turn into little animals. They get rolled up into basketballs. They put on dance shows. And don't even get me started on how weird the Midnight Bliss move is. These games are wildly animated to have frantic cartoony vibes to them. And I'm not saying the RE engine can't do that. I'm saying I haven't seen it to these lengths just yet. But Arc System Works? They nail that animation style. You stop and go frame by frame, and it is crazy how expressive these characters get. And as for the sense of humor, just look at any of Fal's super moves in Guilty Gear and the characters' reactions to them, and you know the Arc System Works guys get it. I've heard people say that they want Darkstalkers to be more serious and to be darker and edgier, and to those people I say, what the hell are you talking about? Because Darkstalkers is not Mortal Kombat. This is not Darkstalkers. But this right here? Now that's Darkstalkers. If any studio out there could nail the look, the tone, and the feel of Darkstalkers in a modern day game, it's Arc System Works. But also, I would trust Arc System Works to handle the gameplay. When it came to the combat, what made Darkstalkers so unique back in the day was its speed. It was one of the first fighting games from a big developer to have different speed settings, allowing for really high-paced gameplay. And its chain combos and air blockings and recovery rolls made it such an aggressive game loaded with maneuverability options. So for this brand new game, we have to keep that going. This needs to be the fastest, craziest game that Capcom has put out since Marvel 3. So, who better to make it than the team behind Guilty Gear, BlazBlue, and Dragon Ball FighterZ? Arc System Works would nail the fast-paced mechanics of the older games, including one big mechanic that needs to return: the Dark Force. This was a mechanic introduced in Darkstalkers 3 where each character could go into some kind of a super state, where they didn't just get stronger, they got a unique buff that bordered on completely changing how the game played. You know the V-Trigger in Street Fighter V where each character got a temporary buff? Well, in that game, it was stuff like, hey, now I can cancel this one move into this one other move. Or now this one special of mine hits a second time. The Dark Force in Darkstalkers was things like, hey, now I pull out a chainsaw. Now there's two of me. Now I'm constantly firing out missiles with every button I hit. Listen, I'm not saying mechanically the Dark Force was better than V-Triggers, but it was definitely cooler, and it was definitely flashier, which is another reason why I would love this game to be handled by Arc System Works. If there is anybody out there who I would trust to come up with some crazy power-up state that looked and sounded really cool and over the top, it's the guys who came up with the Dragon install. In fact, maybe we could even take inspiration from the Dragon install and make each of these power-ups an actual transformation rather than them bringing out some new weapon or assist character. Like, these are monsters that we're talking about. Maybe this new version of the Dark Force could actually cause them to become the most monstrous version of themselves. For example, in the old games, when Dimitri would do some of his super moves, he would transform into this big shadowy vampire. In this brand new game, he changes into that form for the entire time that he's in Dark Force mode. Morrigan normally has wings on her head and on her waist. When she goes into Dark Force mode, she gets these big giant Shin Megami Tensei Lucifer wings for a limited amount of time that enhance all of her special moves. Felicia, this one's easy. She's a werecat who's like 80% human. Make her just turn into a full-blown Catwoman, kind of like John Talbane except for cats instead of wolves. Speaking of John Talbane, he's a kung fu werewolf who summons out fiery dragons to attack. Way I see it, there's two different directions you can go with this one. Either his fur gets spikier and his eyes go white like he just lost all control to his monstrous side, or his fur starts glowing and fire starts swirling around him like he's fully mastered his martial arts powers. Also, it just occurred to me that at this point I'm basically describing a brand new Bloody Roar game, which we should really do an episode on in the future. Point is, if you want to give your character some kind of a power-up super state that would have a ton of flash to it, this is how you do it. And for anyone saying, you can't possibly do that, having characters transform like that in the middle of a match would be too graphically demanding. And to that I say, I used Marvel 3 as an example of how fast this game should move. That game is nearly 15 years old at this point, and Dante, Virgil, Phoenix, all of them had super moves where they fully transformed. Trust me, you can totally make something like this work. Now I will say, so far I've mostly just referenced mechanics from the previous games, but there is one new mechanic that I would love to see introduced into this game. And by new mechanic, I mean it's something from another game that I am totally stealing. When thinking of what additions I would love to see to a brand new Darkstalkers, I decided to look at some other fighting games full of dark, spooky characters. And I came to Mortal Kombat. Now, I know some of you are thinking I'm talking about fatalities, and no. Listen, Darkstalkers has blood and macabre designs, but it's not the kind of game where characters get their guts ripped out. At most, we could maybe put in here some brutality-style finishers, like, say you cut a character in half. The old games had stuff like that, and they still kept the slapsticky-style tone of the series, so you could make that work. Like, for example, you have Bishamon slice the character up a whole bunch of times with his final attack, and then they just all fall to the ground in a bunch of cubes. I could see something like that working, but full-blown fatalities, nah, it doesn't fit this series. So no, the mechanic that I'm actually talking about is coming from Mortal Kombat X. Remember how in that game they gave each character 3 variations, giving everyone 3 different ways to play the same character? I think that is one of the smartest things any fighting game in the past decade has done, and anytime that I can advocate to bring that back, I'm going to do it. But why am I suggesting putting it into a brand new Darkstalkers? Well, this is a franchise that's all about the human and demon realm clashing, the forces of darkness going to war. So how about we have 3 different versions of your character? The classic version, which is your standard right down the middle version, the light version, which is a version of the character with a bigger focus on defense, and the dark version, which is a more aggressive build for the character. And if it sounds like I'm stretching on this idea, well, I've got another reason for including it, but I'll get to that later. So, when it comes to the graphics and the gameplay, leave that to ArcSys to works. But what about the rest of the game? Stuff like the online lobbies. You know what, let's bring Capcom back in and let them take this responsibility. Okay, in all fairness, as much as I don't like the Strive lobbies, ArcSys also handled the Grand Blue Fantasy Versus lobbies, and you know something? They're actually kinda dope, so credit where credit is due. But I do feel this is what we're talking about because the day and age of boring online lobbies is behind us. Lobbies now need to be the cool place to hang out in your fighting games. They need to have just as much personality as the characters themselves. And for Darkstalkers, there is such a good idea for a lobby sitting right there. Have it be set in the Ainsland family castle. Yeah, Morrigan's big family manor. We've gotten glimpses of it in the stages, in the arcade endings, in the comics, but now let's make it a full-blown castle that you can explore. Have the big grand entrance hall be where you start and it's loaded with arcade cabinets that you can play matches on. Then there's a dining hall just off to the side and you can talk to zombie servants over there to buy customizations or edit your profile. Then there can be a throne room where Morrigan's father Belial appears to give you rewards for pulling off achievements in the game, or assigns you with weekly quests to pull off for additional prizes. I know some people would say that we should make Belial a playable character since he's often spoken of but he's never actually been in the game itself. But that dude is like 30 feet tall. If you made him playable in this game, you wouldn't even be able to see his torso during the match. All your moves would be low attacks. You would never be able to land an overhead on him. Then there would be one more room in this mansion. Out behind the main entrance, there would be a graveyard, except each tombstone is another arcade cabinet, but these cabinets would offer crazy special matches, kind of like the extreme battles in Street Fighter 6. So that's the gameplay, the look, and the online. So next up is the roster. But in order to get to that, let's actually address the big burning question here. What the heck are we going to do with the brand new Darkstalkers? What is this game about? I mean, other than monsters fighting each other. Yeah, this was the biggest question for me because if you've spent more than 5 minutes looking into the world of Darkstalkers, you know this series has a massive lore behind it. The way the demon realm of the Makai is set up, and the royal class structure within it, and how the monstrous night warriors exist within the human realm, and how there are hunters established to take them on. Yeah, this was a surprisingly rich and full universe they established back in the day. And there was a story across these games. Nothing as huge as KOF or Tekken, but there was something that they were building upon. However, yeah, it's been 25 years since the last game. I said there's still a lot of fans of these characters, but I'm also positive about half the people out there who are making fan art of them probably weren't even born when the last game came out. So the big question I had was, should we continue the series, or should we just reboot the whole franchise? Just start completely fresh, take plot lines from the previous games and redo them, forget how certain character storylines ended. I mean, in Darkstalkers 3, John Talbane overcame the darkness inside of him. And in the second game, Donovan gave into the darkness inside of him and lost control. And then years later on a home release, they put out a secret little bit of extra story that showed Donovan's sidekick Anita all grown up, and she had to stop him, implying that he died. So, should we continue that? Or should we just start fresh? Well, I say we do a bit of both. Let's say this game is framed like a complete reboot. The Darkstalkers are back with a fresh start, and you get to see all these familiar faces, but you're meeting them again for the first time, and maybe they're updated a bit. They would still be similar to how they were before, we're not drastically changing them, but maybe we could update everyone's looks. Don't get me wrong, the classic Darkstalker designs were all iconic and I love them, and everyone in this game would have multiple costumes, so you could always swap back to their old designs. But I do think we could give each character a brand new design to help this game stand out and feel like an actual new installment. I mean, Darkstalkers had been plagued with just getting re-release after re-release after re-release for 20 years. Giving everyone a brand new look would feel like the cycle was broken. It would feel like, yes, this is an actual new game. And we're talking about a Capcom game, and we're talking about letting ArcSys Works handle it. And both Street Fighter VI and Guilty Gear Strive took these character outfits from the previous games and updated them into something more fashionable, something that you could actually see people wearing while still looking iconic and cool. And I kinda love that direction. And the Darkstalkers characters were always loaded with personality and attitude, so I feel like they would be the perfect candidates to get this same treatment. But as for their storylines and backstories, again, they'd be similar to how they were in the previous games, but maybe there's a few changes here and there. For example, let's say then the old game's Victor's creator died, now he's alive. Maybe a completely different person got possessed by the Bishamon armor. Felicia in the old games wanted to be a Las Vegas showgirl, maybe now she wants to be a movie star. I'd follow the adventures of Felicia Goes to Hollywood. Lilith was a portion of Morrigan's soul that her father Bilal removed when she was a child, and it wasn't until Jeddah found that soul that he then sculpted it into a living creature. But let's say then the backstory of this new game, Bilal separated that chunk of Morrigan's soul, and then he just turned into Lilith, and the two of them grew up as sisters with no clue that they shared a soul. Again, 9% of these characters would be the exact same, but it would bring them back to their basics to create a jumping on point for brand new players, while being just different enough to not feel like a complete retread. And to help you meet these characters and learn about this world, we'd give each character their own unique story mode. A series of fights with little panels of artwork between the battles, so that way you can learn about each of these characters. Sort of like the story mode in Street Fighter V, except that you would get more than just 2 fights per character, and the difficulty wouldn't be permanently locked at the lowest setting. So, each character would have their story modes, but let's say some story modes are locked until you have gone through enough of them. I hear people all the time saying that they miss when fighting games had secret unlockable characters, and hey, I get it, I get that you want that sense of achievement of unlocking a brand new character, but sadly with how important the competitive scene is in fighting games today, that's just not possible. You need every character to be unlocked right at the start so that way people can start training right off the bat, and tournament organizers don't have to spend hours and days and weeks before the show unlocking characters. However, when it comes to stuff like single-player content, stuff like character-specific story modes, yeah, those are totally on the table. You can make certain character story modes unlockable, which still gives you that same sense of achievement, but it also helps to slowly reveal details about this story. So, you would slowly go through each character as you unlock the cast, and the final character story mode that you unlocked would be for Jeddah. Why Jeddah? Because in Darkstalkers 3, Jeddah was trying to merge all souls in reality together into one being, one singularity that he could rule over, essentially recreating the universe in his image. Well, of course he's the villain, so we all assume that he lost. But what if he didn't? Yeah, it's been 25 years since the last game. Let's acknowledge the fact that these characters have been gone this long and say they weren't just gone because they didn't get a new game. They were gone because they lost. They died. Jeddah won and destroyed the entire universe. But it didn't work out the way that he wanted. Jeddah wanted to merge all souls in the universe into one new being, the fetus of God, which he would then control. But let's say that when all the souls were finally sucked into that focal point, instead of merging into one being, they exploded out, creating a brand new Big Bang that spawned a whole new universe. And because it's a new reality, nobody has any memories of the previous world. Except for Jeddah. Let's say that after his plan literally blew up in his face, Jeddah was trapped outside of this new universe, floating in the infinite black nothingness, and after spending millennia in the void, he was finally able to break free, only to find that this perfect new universe of his was just as screwed up as the previous one. Bilal was still running the demon realm, the humans that he despised so much still existed, but now he finds that his royal family, House Doma, doesn't exist in this new world. Let's say that if his soul was the only one not sucked into this new Big Bang, then it left him completely erased from this new reality. That's why he'd be the final character story that you could unlock. He'd be that character that finally explains what's going on here, and he drops the big surprise twist that this whole world is not the original reality. And before anyone says, isn't that the same thing that they did in Mortal Kombat 1? Listen, that universe was completely different from the original, and they rebooted their universe because, well, it's Mortal Kombat, and I guess they just like doing that. But in this game, this universe would be, as I said, almost exactly the same as the previous one. We're just doing this because, again, it's been 25 years. We kinda need a fresh entry point for everyone. But if you were interested in the old plot lines, well, then we got Jeddah here at the very end to give you a little taste of that, to let you know, no, all that stuff still happened. Now, I know that was a big, long, fanficky explanation, but now that we know what kind of a story we're dealing with, we can talk about the roster. Let's start with the size. Street Fighter 6 launched with 18 characters, so I feel like it's safe to say Capcom would probably go with around the same number for this game. And hey, not including the secret characters, do you know how many Darkstalkers have been in all the games combined? 18. We could just take the easy route here and include all of them and call it a day. But no, people have been waiting for over 2 decades for a new Darkstalkers. As much as I know they would love to see this entire cast return, you know what else people have been eagerly awaiting? Brand new Darkstalkers. People have been waiting for new Night Warriors for years now. If you release this game and there are no new characters, the disappointment would be palpable. Plus, if you shove every single old character into the starting roster, then who are you going to include in your DLC? That means that every season of your DLC would have to rely on brand new characters, which is a big gamble. So, who to keep and who to save for DLC? Let's go with 13 returning characters and 5 brand new ones. First up, the obvious choice, Morrigan. She's the face of the series and the main reason anyone even talks about this game to this day. Then after that, let's hit up all the horror movie tropes. Dimitri, the vampire, Talbane, the werewolf, Victor, the Frankenstein, or as Wikipedia calls him, the reanimated human construct. Yeah, I'm just gonna keep calling you a Frankenstein. Anyways, next we have Anakaris the Mummy, BB Hood the Slasher, and Lord Raptor the Zombie. Also, quick side note, considering this is a rebooted universe, maybe we could finally establish that his real name is Zabel Zarek, but his stage name is Lord Raptor. This franchise has always had weird naming inconsistencies between the English and Japanese versions, so maybe we could finally clear all those up. Then 2 more fan favorites, Hisinko and Felicia. You would be crazy to leave these 2 out. Then I already mentioned Jeddah for the story reasons, plus honestly I think he's one of Capcom's best fighting game villains. It would be great to see him come back. Then let's throw Lilith in there. This is another reason why I say we should just reboot the entire series and change the timeline a bit, because Lilith is a super popular character. A super popular character with a crazy backstory that we could maybe clear up just a little bit. And at the end of Darkstalkers 3, her canonical ending is she gets reabsorbed into Morrigan and ceases to exist. Yeah, ain't no way we're getting rid of a character that popular. She comes back. Then you know what? I'm going to go with Donovan. I know people are kind of 50-50 on him. Some people love him, some people think he's kind of boring. But he's a character who changed greatly as this series went on. He became evil and then eventually died. So, if we're rebooting this series, bringing back a dead character would be a great way to take advantage of that. I mean, dead as in they're no longer here. I don't mean dead like Lord Raptor is dead. By that definition, we're actually bringing back multiple dead characters. You know what? You know what I'm talking about. But that leaves us with one spot left. So, who is our final fighter? Well, Huitzul and Pyron were the sub-boss and boss of the first game respectively, so even though this is a reboot, I don't think we should just repeat the premise of the first game that much, so we'll save them for later. So, that leaves us with Sasquatch, Rikuo, QB, and Bishamon. This is a tough choice, because honestly, there's no wrong answer here. Any of them would be great additions, but as I said, I want to save some of the classics for the DLC, and Rikuo, Sasquatch, and Bishamon were all from the original game. So, I'm going to save them for future seasons of DLC to give them a little bit more weight. Meaning QB is our final returning character, which I'm fine with. I really like QB. I think she's one of the most underrated characters in this entire franchise. She's got a great design, she has some of the best animations to her supers in this entire game, and the humanoid bug creature is another classic monster trope. And considering in the previous games Jedha commanded her race of bee people, I would love for him to show up and demand that all the bee people obey him again, but now they all just look at him like, who the hell are you? But that leaves us with 5 new characters, and I'm not going to come with a bunch of OCs to shove in here, but you know what? I can at least suggest some new monster types to include. We got rid of Bishamon, so we do need some kind of a new ghost-type character, and part of me feels like we should make this new spirit an Onryo. But if you did that, people would just keep comparing her to Hisako from Killer Instinct, and you can't beat Hisako from Killer Instinct. So instead, let's make this new ghost a Banshee. They've got those high-pitched wails which would make for perfect attacks, and Darkstalkers loves to take these classic monster types and stylize them. So I would love to see their take on a modern-day Banshee. Make her like a punk rocker who loves music and listens to Lord Raptor songs all the time. Then, this series has included almost every horror story staple that you can imagine, but they have never had a witch. We need to rectify that. When you think of classic monsters, when you think of what kids dress up on as Halloween, you got your Draculas, you got your Frankensteins, and you got your witches. And while I would totally be cool with a brand new original character created just for this game, part of me wants to suggest using Tessa from Red Earth. Listen, the characters in Red Earth are great, but that is a franchise that is definitely not coming back. I mean, I'm a Darkstalkers fan, so if I say a series has no shot of returning, you know it's dead. But Red Earth did have a manga crossover with Darkstalkers, and Tessa has the look to fit in with this spooky cast of characters. So, considering that we rebooted the whole timeline, let's just say Tessa now exists in this universe. Then, speaking of older Capcom characters who would fit in here, Ruby Hart from Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was originally created for a brand new Darkstalkers game that ended up getting scrapped, so they decided to take that character and bring her into the Versus series. So hey, if you want to get people talking, let's fulfill her destiny and finally put her in an official Darkstalkers game. Maybe we can make her a little bit spookier to match this tone, like give her a couple more attacks involving her pirate ghost, or let her call out a kraken to attack. Now for the next character, I will admit, I was tempted to use Marionette. She was one of the secret characters that you could get in the older Darkstalkers games. She wasn't an actual character herself, she was actually kind of a mirror match character, but I thought, you know what? The creepy doll or puppet has been a long-running horror tradition. We could take that character and turn her into her own official full-blown fighter with her own unique moveset. However, I've already included 2 pre-existing Capcom characters in here and claimed they're new characters. I can't do that with a third one. We will save Marionette for DLC. Instead, let's get an actual new character in here, another brand new monster. And for this next spot, I'm going to get a little bit weird with my pick. I'm going to say a Gorgon. When you think of horror movie monsters, they're not typically the ones you go to. There are not a lot of Gorgon horror movies out there. However, they are a unique, interesting type of monster, and I don't think I've ever seen a Gorgon represented in a fighting game before. You could have them attack with their snake hair, you could give them moves where they turn the opponent into stone. There's a lot that you could do with this monster type. And as for their personality, you can lean into their serpent design and their power set and have them be some kind of a cold-blooded killer. Or you could decide to be really unique with it and try and go the opposite direction with it. Have her be really shy and bashful. The exact opposite of a personality you would expect for a Gorgon. Or just like with some of the other monster types in here, try and modernize her a little bit. I don't know, maybe make her like an artist or something who's obsessed with making statues. Again, to repeat myself, I know it's not your typical horror movie monster, but I do think there's some interesting stuff you could do there. Now, before we get to the final character, let's talk about the boss of this game. I'll admit, I was tempted to make the boss of the game the Grim Reaper. I mean, that is another classic spooky horror figure, and then you could make the whole metaphor for Darkstalkers are not dead, but that's a bit on the nose, isn't it? So instead, let's make the boss something big. And when it comes to horror, you can't get much bigger than Cthulhu. No, literally, you can't get much bigger than him. He's gigantic. Now, obviously, I don't mean we should just make Cthulhu itself the final boss, but I mentioned that the idea behind this game is that the universe got rebooted and Jeddah is the only one to remember the old reality because he was trapped outside of space and time when the universe was reborn. Well, let's say that he finally breaks back into our world, but something followed him from the void that he was in. There was something in the darkness, something from before this world, before any world. And now, it's looking to bring this reality into the infinite nothingness from which it spawned. When it comes to big horror final bosses, plenty of people go the route of cosmic creatures that are too great for our minds to even comprehend. Whether it be old gods, the great ones, the Eldrazi, if it's the size of a mountain, is made up of grotesque tentacles, and makes you go crazy just from being near it, it's final boss material for a horror game. But this beast won't be our final fighter. No, I figured this final boss should be so big you can't even fit it all on screen. Think Onslaught in the original Marvel vs. Capcom. It's been a long time since we got a skyscraper-sized final boss in a fighting game. It'll be refreshing to get one after so long. So, who is our final new character? Another classic horror trope, the crazy cultist. Have it be some guy who worships our big freaky old god, decked out in a robe and swinging around a copy of the Necronomicon as his weapon and summoning out spells and raising the dead to attack for him. Think of them as the representative for Lovecraftian eldritch horror in this roster. So okay, those are our characters. But what are we going to do with them? Let's talk single player content. Now of course each character would have an arcade mode, but there's another mode from an older Darkstalkers game that I would want to bring back. But with a little bit of a twist. When Darkstalkers came to the PSP, they included a mode called Chaos Tower. In this mode, you had to make your way through several fights, each one progressing you a certain amount through a massive tower, with various challenges and rewards along the way. I think this is a good idea, but it could have been done a little better. The implementation of this idea was a bit clunky. But that's another reason why I say we should hand this off to ArcSys. Because in the BlazBlue series, they had a mode very similar to this called Abyss Mode. Rather than climbing up a tower, you instead were descending down depths, and your performance in each fight would determine how far you descended. So it's kinda similar, except the way that you progressed was so much smoother, and you also got to choose a buff for your character with each fight. And since your buffs all stacked, you could end up making something really creative and super broken. It essentially turned the game into a roguelike where you were trying to figure out what abilities you could mix together and how they could end up completely breaking the game, and you were always trying to get past your previous record to see how far you could get with each run, and every single time that you played it, it was completely different. It's one of the most addictive single-player experiences I've ever had in a fighting game. So, since Darkstalkers already have mode like this, and we're now handing it off to a company that perfected this mode, let's just have them do the exact same thing for Darkstalkers. But as I mentioned earlier, in addition to your standard arcade mode, we'd also have a story mode for each character, where you would have a series of battles, with a few bits of artwork between each match to tell their story. But we can go one step further with this idea. Your fighting game single-player modes need replayability, and this new Chaos Tower mode I mentioned would be great for that. But we can also do something with these story modes to encourage you to keep coming back to them. As we all know, Darkstalkers is a horror-themed fighting game. And do you know what a lot of horror video games have? Multiple endings. Let's say that each character story mode will have a good ending, a bad ending, and a true ending, or in other words, the canonical ending. For example, let's take John Talbane. His good ending would be that he cures himself of his werewolf disease, and the bad ending is he loses control and is overcome by the beast inside. But the true ending is he remains a werewolf, but he learns how to control it. Dimitri, he challenges Morrigan's father Belial for rule of the Makai. Good ending is he wins and becomes the king of the demon realm. Bad ending is he loses and is locked in the Einzelin family dungeon. True ending is he loses, but he stays free and keeps waging war against Morrigan and her family. And as for how to get these endings, we can go about it in two ways. One is you can just have there be dialogue choices between the matches, and your choices change where the story goes. Or we can go the Killer Instinct route. Yeah, Killer Instinct 2013 had the same idea. Each character story mode had 3 different endings, and they would be decided on whether or not you could pull off certain achievements while going through the fights. And this was so addictive. I kept going back through these story modes again and again to try and get these specific endings. It was such a smart way to do a story mode, and it would fit in this game perfectly. And if you want to go that extra step, give each character 3 costumes, 1 for each ending. You start the game with your character's basic costume, which is their true ending. But there are also costumes you can get for reaching their good and bad endings. This would be a great way to encourage players to keep going through the single-player content more than once, and the more you can keep that single-player audience playing your game, the more likely they are to keep coming back to your game, whether it's to play it online, play brand new character story modes, buy the DLC. Trust me, when you give your single-player content and your fighting games replayability, everybody wins. In fact, remember earlier when I mentioned giving each character different variations, 3 ways to play them? Tie that into this story mode. I don't mean you would have to beat the story mode to unlock their different variations. No, those would be there at launch. You could never go into story mode and you would have access to all 3 of their variations. But to give a little bit of backstory to these different variations, you could say that the dark and light versions tie into the story a bit. Like, take Donovan. In one of the home releases of Darkstalkers, they include a secret version of him called D that was essentially him giving in to his vampire side. Have that be his bad ending in story mode, and have his dark variation play just like D used to. Admittedly, this wouldn't apply to every character, but it would be a nice touch for a few of them. But that's it. We covered the roster, the premise, the single-player content, the gameplay, the online. We have now laid out everything that we would love to see in a brand new Darkstalkers game. Will this franchise ever return one day? Hell no, this series is dead. But it's Halloween, the one night of the year when the dead can rise. So if there was ever a time to dream about the Night Warriors returning, it's today. So I hope you enjoyed all your little tricks and treats tonight. Share your thoughts down below. What would you like to see from a brand new Darkstalkers game? Or follow me around the web at my socials down below, or get more content from us on Patreon, like these fine folks who you're seeing up on screen right now. Or tell you what, if you haven't checked out the Capcom Find Collection, give it a try. Go out there and pick up that collection. You can get every single Darkstalkers game on there. It's a really well done, lovingly crafted collection of these games. It's a ton of fun. Go out there, check them out. And of course, I have to give a huge thank you to the MushWyrm for the amazing Morrigan design that she did. She has actually done multiple redesigns for these Let's Make a Sequel videos that we've done in the past. It is always a pleasure to work with her. I'm going to put her socials and where you can find her online in the description down below. I want to see all of you going out there, giving her a follow, share some of her work around. She is incredibly talented, and again, I really appreciate her help on this video. But that's it. Thank you guys again for tuning in to my annual Darkstalkers Geek Out video. Whatever you end up doing today, I hope that you guys are safe. I hope that you are happy. I hope that you just get to enjoy yourself today. So thank you guys for tuning in. Stay safe out there. And happy Halloween.